Week 9 for NFL and fantasy are in the books. Today is November 11th, 2023. It is a beautiful fall day outside. Weather is fantastic. The sun is so nice. Get outside and enjoy the day. If you're just looking for ads and drops for your fantasy team, stop right now. Look below in the comments. I've got that information for you. If you're looking for more detail on teams and players, I'm going to give you that. All right, here we go. First game of the week was Pittsburgh Steelers beating the Tennessee Titans 20-16. Will Levis got his second start and actually looks like he's an NFL quarterback. Was he perfect? No, but he has arm strength. He has moxie. He looks like the real deal. For me, he's an ad in Dynasty. He makes DeAndre Hopkins relevant immediately. He also makes the other pass catchers interesting too. Kyle Phillips had 4 receptions for 68 yards. And then Chig had 3 for 28 yards. Not a ton, but DeAndre Hopkins is obviously the target hog there with 11 targets in that offense. So Derrick Henry had a nice game, 17 carries, 1 TD. Tajay Spears wasn't that big in the mix. Neither was Treylon Burks, so there might be a few buy windows for those players. Steelers, Kenny Pickett looks like Kenny Pickett, like a slightly above average quarterback, and he plays like it pretty consistently. Jaylen Warren, he didn't have as many touches on the ground as Najee Harris, but he was way more effective. 11 carries, 88 yards. Najee had a pretty good game for him, 16 carries, 69 yards, 1 touchdown. Deontay Johnson, upon returning from his injury, continues to be the target hog with 9. The next closest person was Najee Harris with 4. All right, Kansas City Chiefs beat the Miami Dolphins 21-14. You would hope that this would be a fantasy football shootout. It was not. It wasn't really that interesting. Raheem Mostert had 12 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 62 yards. Jalen Waddle, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 42 yards. So not the typical days that you see from either player. And then it's even worse for Kansas City. Nobody really worth noting. The most targets is Justin Watson had 5, but he had 2 catches for 15 yards. Noah Gray had 3 receptions for 34 yards, and he was the leading yard getter in that offense. Really, really bad game for fantasy. So, anyways, moving on. Vikings, this is interesting. Josh Dobbs came into the game, helped them beat the Falcons 31-28. So Dobbs had 7 carries, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Any format, he's an own. Seasonal, Dynasty, if you're looking to make a playoff push late in the year in Dynasty, especially Superflex, Dobbs might be a really cost-effective player that can get you that far. He loves his tight ends. He loved his tight ends in Arizona. He continued to target the tight ends in Minnesota, 12 targets for TJ Hawkinson, 7 receptions, 69 yards. Jordan Addison had 7 touches. Nobody else was really worth noting. One injury that happened during the game, Cam Akers again tore his Achilles tendon. He'll be out a while. That's the second time he's done that in his career. Poor dude, can't catch a break. So Alexander Madison is going to be the bell cow now, and Ty Chandler is on the radar again for a backup in deep leagues or Dynasty. Atlanta continues to be a fantasy football mess. Other than Jonnu Smith, who do you play? Jonnu had 6 targets, not a lot, but for a tight end, pretty good. 5 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown. After that, Kadarius Hodge, second week in a row that he's had pretty good production. Starting to be on my radar, but Kyle Pitts, 4 catches, 56 yards. I guess for PPR, that's solid. But beyond that, nobody's really a big-time producer there. This was out without Drake London, too. Drake London didn't play, and nobody really had a standout game, which is pretty indicative of how Arthur Smith coaches his teams. I do not understand why he doesn't target his best players more, and I don't understand why he doesn't play Bijan Robinson more. He's for sure the best running back on the team. He only had 11 carries for 51 yards. Anyways, moving on to the next game. The Cleveland Browns beat the dog shit out of the Arizona Cardinals. 27-0. Arizona Cardinals are 1-8. They do get Kyler Murray back this week. so things will change for them. Hopefully you've been stashed in some of their pass catchers like Marquise Brown and Trey McBride. Marquise Brown had 8 targets. That'll probably be the same or more moving forward with Kyler coming back. And then Trey McBride only had 5 targets, but I expect those numbers to go up when he comes back. Nobody else was worth talking about at all in that offense. Browns, Deshaun Watson's back. His shoulder looked pretty good. 2 touchdowns, 219 yards. Amari Cooper had a big game on 5 targets. He had 5 receptions, 139 yards and a touchdown. Jerome Ford had 7 targets. Running back Jerome Ford, 5 catches, 33 yards, and then he had 44 yards on the ground. Pretty solid player. Beyond that, David Njoku had 6 targets, 4 receptions, 26 yards. So those were the big players in the game for the Browns. Next game, Green Bay Packers beat the Rams 20-3. Brett Rippon was the quarterback for the Rams. I did not expect him to do great at all. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua both had 7 targets, but largely irrelevant for fantasy perspective. Same with the running backs. Nobody was really worth discussing. Packers. Jordan Love caught a break going up against a backup quarterback this week. 20 for 26 on attempts, 228 yards and a touchdown. He did pretty well for Jordan Love. That might be his spike week moving forward. It might be this. I don't believe in his talent. I need to see something much better from him from about 3 games in a row before I would change my mind. Aaron Jones is back from injury, 20 carries, 73 yards, touchdown. And then he had 4 receptions, 26 yards on 6 targets. He's an RB1 moving forward with that kind of volume. Luke Musgrave had his first touchdown, and then Christian Watson only had 1 reception, was targeted twice for 37 yards. And then Jaden Reed only had 3 receptions for 19 yards. So that's disappointing. Those guys are ultra talented, and I'm at a loss as to why they don't target those guys more. Good buys for Dynasty, by the way. Okay, Commanders, Patriots. Commanders beat the Patriots 20-17. Sam Howell, for fantasy, seasonal league, for Dynasty, he's got to be picked up. They just traded their 2 defensive ends, Montez Sweat and Chase Young, this week. The secondary isn't great. They're going to be passing a lot if they're going to be competing in games. And they're already passing a lot. The volume may continue to go up. He had 45 attempts. Probably going to be that way moving forward. Maybe not that much, but it'll be high volume. 325 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And then he had 5 carries on the ground for 27 yards. Get Sam Howell. He's going to be a cheap playoff push kind of guy in seasonal or dynasty. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are showing up now. 7 targets, 8 targets. So finally we're getting some production out of those guys. I think it's the 2nd week in a row Jahan Dotson has a touchdown. It'll be cool to see him be reliable. And then Brian Johnson had 18 carries, 63 yards, and a touchdown. So they had some producers that were showing up on Sunday. New England Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson, 9 carries. But on his 9 carries, he had 87 yards and a touchdown. Good for him. He had 4 receptions, 42 yards. More of that, please. I don't own any Ramondre Stevenson, forgive me. But I think he's worth targeting if you're in a seasonal or dynasty league for sure. Demario Douglas, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 55 yards. Juju Smith-Schuster, 7 targets, 6 receptions, 51 yards. Hunter Henry, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 39 yards. And then Jalen Reagor and Ezekiel Elliott, 6 targets and 5 targets. They were really distributed evenly. If we see any kind of vacuum that would go to like Demario Douglas, a few more touches, or Hunter Henry, we're going to see a little more production, and then you can actually put them in their lineups consistently. All right. New Orleans Saints beat the Bears 24-17. Justin Fields should be back this upcoming week, if not the week after. But Tyson Bagent, for being a Division II rookie quarterback, looks pretty damn good. He may not get his shot here in Chicago, but he may get a shot somewhere else. Deep dynasty leagues, he's worth a stash. D'Onta Foreman continues to be the bell cow, 20 carries, 83 yards. And then Tyson Bagent on the ground had 8 carries for 70 yards. That's good shit. Darnell Mooney led the Bears with 82 yards receptions. 82 yards in the air is what I meant, with 5 receptions. There we go. Cole Kmet had 8 targets, 6 receptions, and 55 yards. For New Orleans, Taysom Hill is the most interesting player they got right now. 11 carries on 52 yards. All right, he plays tight end, but he also had 4 receptions, 13 yards, and a touchdown. He's like tight end one. I picked him up in a few leagues. I've been playing him, and he's been producing. He is, in my opinion, the best runner that they've got right now. Alvin Kamara isn't that efficient on the ground, especially at his advanced stage. Jamal Williams never was efficient on the ground. That was masked by his 17 touchdowns in Detroit last year. And then Kendre Miller only had 1 touch. So it's Taysom Hill, in my opinion. And then in the air, Chris Olave had 8 targets, 6 receptions, 46 yards, and he finally got a touchdown. Alvin Kamara, 4 receptions, 44 yards. So, a solid day from him. Gives you a solid floor. If his floor is roughly 10 points for fantasy, that's pretty damn good. Deeper leagues, if you're looking for a stash, Kendre Miller. He only had 1 reception, but it was for 31 yards. I really like his talent. When Alvin Kamara is gone, it's his show. But for seasonal, if there's an injury to Kamara or Williams, I would stash Miller. Next game. Wow, this is a blowout. Baltimore Ravens beat the Seahawks 37-3. Man, the Ravens look really, really good on offense. Lamar Jackson had a good day. Keaton Mitchell, 9 carries, 138 yards, and a touchdown. He's probably not going to get goal line carries. He's not a big running back, but he's the most explosive guy. So from a PPR perspective, I think he's more interesting. In a seasonal league that's standard, I'm probably not going to pick him up. Gus Edwards had 2 touchdowns, 5 carries for 52 yards. He had a fantastic day. And then the steady Mark Edwards, 9 receptions, 80 yards. Zay Flowers only had 1 target. So he started out really hot, and then he's really fallen off quite a bit. So if you're looking for a good buy low window in Dynasty, Zay Flowers is that dude. Seahawks. There was a lot of regression from Geno Smith in the running game. The running game was fucking terrible. The only really bright spot of the day was Jackson Smith-Njigba, 6 receptions, 63 yards, and then DK Metcalf had 1 catch for 50 yards on 4 targets. So pretty bad day for their offense. May give you a buy low window for some of those players. They'll generally do better than that. But, if you're looking at Kenny Walker, Zach Charbonnet buys, it's a good time to do it. Next game. Oh, boy. Houston Texans and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's the C.J. Stroud show. 470 yards, 5 touchdowns. Incredible. How he was not the number 1 quarterback taken overall still blows my mind. Fantastic. You ready for these receiver numbers? Noah Brown, 6 receptions, 153 yards, and a touchdown. Dalton Schultz, 10 receptions, 130 yards, 1 touchdown. Tank Dell, 6 receptions, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then Nico Collins, 3 receptions, 54 yards for a touchdown. I mean, that's fantasy relevant right there. Beautiful. It has to be this way because Houston does not have a running game. Devin Singletary, 13 carries, 26 yards, will not get it done. It's not going to work. So look for them to address that in the offseason. Tampa Bay, there was a real big bright spot on their team too. Rachaad White finishes the RB1 overall for the weekend. 20 carries, 73 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and then in the air he had 4 receptions for 46 yards. It's good stuff. He had a brutal schedule early on. So he's starting to come on. He's a good trade candidate if you're looking to make a playoff push. It is worth noting that Cade Otton had 9 targets. 9. 6 receptions. 70 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was a good day for him. And then Mike Evans, 4 receptions, 87 yards. Colts and Panthers. Colts won 27-13. Jonathan Taylor, not a big day from him, but he did have 5 receptions for 22 yards and a touchdown, so that matters in PPR. Michael Pittman, 8 receptions, 64 yards. He was the leading target getter that game. There's not much worth discussing on the Carolina side. It was just really bad. Again, how did they not take C.J. Stroud first? Really, they should have either taken him or Anthony Richardson above Bryce Young, but it is what it is. All right, we got 4 more games to go here. The next one, this was a really, really bad game for the Giants. The Las Vegas Raiders, on the back of Josh McDaniels firing, scored 30 points and beat the Giants 30-6. Giants lost Daniel Jones for the year. He tore his ACL. Tyrod Taylor might be out for the year, so their quarterback is Tommy DeVito. Not going to be good for them. They might get the first overall pick. I don't know how they win a game the rest of the year. Their offense is really bad. Outside of Saquon Barkley, I don't think there's really anybody worth owning or discussing at this point. So it's either Barkley or nothing. Vegas did much better. Josh Jacobs had a nice game. 26 carries, 98 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And he did not receive a target in the air. And Devontae Adams had 7 targets, 4 receptions, 34 yards. Not much going on in the passing game. It was a pretty heavy defensive game. It worked out really well for rookie quarterback Aiden O'Connell, who came in and played for Jimmy Garoppolo, who's probably the better quarterback, O'Connell that is. So it's probably going to be his show the rest of the year. I do not expect high volume in their passing game. I do want to point out one thing. I'm an IDP guy, which means individual defensive player. Max Crosby, probably one of my favorite players in the league to watch. 8 tackles for a defensive end. 8 fucking tackles. 6 solo. 3 sacks. 3 tackles for loss. And 3 quarterbacks hits. That's nuts. He had a fantastic game. He scored me a lot of points in fantasy. Anyways, next game. I did get to watch this one. Philadelphia Eagles versus the Dallas Cowboys. It was a grind. That game could have gone either way. Dak Prescott, if you had him in fantasy and started him, I had him in a couple leagues, 374 yards, 3 touchdowns. Incredible. CeeDee Lamb, 16 targets. That's Jamar Chase level behavior. 11 receptions, 191 yards. Outstanding game. Top level, elite talent game from him. And then Jake Ferguson, 7 receptions, 91 yards and a touchdown. And then Jalen Tolbert, 3 receptions, 49 yards and a touchdown. He's worth looking at in deep leagues. Jalen Hurts had a solid day. He's working through an injury. He did have 207 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He did have a touchdown on the ground, 10 carries, 36 yards. And then A.J. Brown. This is like A.J. Brown's low game for the year. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 66 yards, 1 touchdown. If that's his floor, that's a damn good floor. And then Devonta Smith, 3 receptions, 51 yards, and a touchdown. One thing to note here is very, very important. Dallas Goedert fractured his forearm. He's going to be out a while. You're going to see Smith and Brown get more targets. It's going to happen. And I'm going to guess DeAndre Swift will see a little more targets too. So keep that in mind. Next game, second to last game I'm going to discuss. I did watch a lot of this game. Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Buffalo Bills. Joe Burrow, 348 yards, 2 touchdowns. Since his rough start to the year, the first 3 games roughly, he's been much better moving forward, and he looks like the classic Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase has a stiff back, reportedly, so he saw 8 targets, but only had 4 catches for 41 yards. So T. Higgins saw the majority of the production, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 110 yards. And then Josh Allen had, from a fantasy perspective, a good game, but in real life, 258 yards, touchdown and interception, rushing 44 yards and a touchdown. QB1 numbers, but in real life, shaky. Heavy consolidated targets now in Buffalo. Stephon Diggs, 7 targets. Dalton Kincaid, you ready for this? 11. Those guys are going to see volume moving forward. So if you have Dalton Kincaid, good for you. Any format, play him. Last game of the week, and I watched this last night. It was a brutal game from a fantasy perspective. If you like defense, it was a good game. Los Angeles Chargers beat the New York Jets 27-6. Justin Herbert wasn't great. 136 yards in the air. Didn't have a touchdown, but Austin Eckler had 2 touchdowns on the ground, and then he did okay. He had 7 targets, 2 receptions and 23 yards. So he did okay last night from a fantasy perspective, but in real life, I don't see the Chargers being a playoff team if this is how they perform moving forward. Keenan Allen, 10,000 yards for his career receiving. Incredible. 8 receptions, 77 yards last night. And then the one other player I want to point out, and it's not because it was good, Quentin Johnston, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 14 yards. Josh Palmer's not playing. Mike Williams is not playing. And he's not seeing volume, and he's not that productive. He might be a bust. I'm not ready to call him that yet, but he has some bust traits. When you watch him play, there are some things that I like about him, and I like them a lot. I like his ability to separate down the field. But if you see him try to catch a ball, he catches all the balls really close to his body. You don't see him extend his arms out a lot. I actually watched a breakdown of Steve Smith talk about him, and I kind of had the same take on him. And then Steve Smith had almost the exact same analysis as me, and I thought, that's not a guy I want to stick with, even with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. So I own 0 shares of him in Dynasty. I own 1 in Seasonal just because of an injury. But other than that, I don't have high hopes for him. I do have high hopes for these 2 guys, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson saw 13 targets, 7 receptions, 80 yards. Breece Hall saw 4 targets as a running back, 4 receptions, 10 yards, and then he had 16 carries for 50 yards. That was a tough matchup for them, and they just don't look good on offense at all. If Aaron Rodgers is going to come back this year, those guys towards the end of the year are going to be big-time producers in your fantasy playoffs. So if I'm making a bet, I'm making a bet that Aaron Rodgers may come back this year, and I'm trying to pick up those guys. So that's all I've got this week. If you've got questions, I'm here. Take it easy.